And then that gal on the end is with the Arizona Trauma Institute. That's Robin Massey. One of the things that happened is I'm coming at this from a totally clinical point of view, and I needed some help. Robin is an organizational psychologist, and so that was our saving grace, recruiting Robin to come and help with this project. So again, make sure if you have a question, just holler out. We'll be glad to answer it. We're just going to let the chrysalis people talk about their experience, and then at the end of that, Robin will talk about the step-by-step process, which you have before you in your packet, and and then we'll do questions and answers as they come up. Is that fair? It's all yours, Patricia.
Oh, I'm so excited. Um, Hi, as Dr. Roten, or as I call him, Bob, um, said, I'm the CEO of Chrysalis, and we are a domestic violence organization. And I've been the CEO for 20 years. Um, and Let me just tell you, now I'm also, so I'm going to just like say, how did we even get here today? So I have to go back to technically 2013, 2014, and I was a Piper Fellow for the Virginia G. Piper Charitable Trust. And Terry's in the back somewhere. Somewhere. You want to wave, Terry? There you go. So I'd applied for the fellowship and received that, and I never realized that the fellowship would lead to where we are today. And the fellowship in and of itself was amazing, and great opportunities. But then there's an organizational award at the end of it that you can apply for funding to help shape the organization. So that's when I did reach out to Dr. Roten to try to find out what pieces and what would be involved in the training for all of us as an organization. And so our journey, and it is a journey, started over a year ago. Um, and so that's how we got here. Um, Angie, do you want to just say a few things? Oh, wait, there we go.
Sure. Um, Again, my name is Angie Swart. I'm the Chief Program Officer at Chrysalis, and we were very excited to work with the Arizona Trauma Institute on this. We had no idea what we were getting ourselves into, though. It was a lot more work, and we'll talk about that throughout than I think any of us realized, even though they were telling us it was going to be a lot of work to go through this process. Um, Chrysalis has always come from being clinical based. We have therapists on site, and most of the majority of them are trained in EMDR. But we wanted to take this broader and make sure that all of our folks had an understanding of trauma, no matter what their role is. Um, and so that's how we got connected to the Trauma Institute. Do you want-
No, so I guess to that point, we have some of how we got really to the Trauma Institute as well, is that we had some clinicians who had gone through Dr. Roten's training. And so it just made natural sense for us to do that. And once we started talking to Dr. Roten and his team, it was very apparent that buy-in had to come from the board of directors first and foremost, that it really is from the top down in that sense. And so before we signed on the dotted line, we had Dr. Roten come and talk to the board of directors because they are a part of the training. They are a part of the integration process then and all board members going forward. And so if they can't buy into the situation, not in the situation, if they can't buy into our new process, then that would be problematic in and of itself. And the board had a lot of questions, not that Dr. Roten would answer them all, because that's how it is that I've had to learn, is that I've been told no a lot. Because I'm the type that if I want, not, okay, well, now I'm self-disclosing. If you ask a question, generally you would get a response, and the response would be, well, how do you think that should be? Instead of like just guiding me and telling me I have to figure it out myself. So that was always a challenge, but we laugh about it. I mean, I think that's the one thing is that we have honesty with with the whole team. So,
And then I would just say too, it was important for the board buy-in before we rolled this out to staff. So when we got the team together, October of 2017, I think, is when we gathered everybody together. They knew that they had the support all from the top down, as Patricia mentioned. We started at that very early stage talking about how relationships were more important than being efficient, and that we were as transparent throughout the process as we could be. We thought we gave a heads up about how many trainings there would be, but there were so many trainings.
there are a lot of trainings. They're also very valuable and worth it. I do agree with that, but it is a lot of time. And that's the one thing is that Dr. Roten thought that it was important, for us to be able to speak, since we had just gone through the process, to be able to tell all the great things, but also some of the challenges and timing and training and staff. That was time consuming, but also very well worth it.
Absolutely. And I think, Patricia mentioned that the board and leadership received a 6-hour training. The leaders had to be able to practice some of these concepts first before we could start asking our staff to be doing this with each other or with the clients. And just an overall commitment to trying to live the principles that we were, even at that point, still trying to understand fully what those principles were. But the commitment was there to do our best to live in line with those. All of our staff received at minimum 12 hours of training. Dr. Roten came out and trained our non-clinical team all together at once, which was great. So there was a lot of people together hearing the same messaging. Our clinical staff also got thorough training and even additional training to what the non-clinical staff had gotten. And then early on, Dr. Roten encouraged us to figure out a way that we can sustain this. And one of those ways were getting videos of the trainings, but also to identify trainers within the organization to become trainers so that we could continue this going forward. So from the onset, we identified 6 trainers to become certified to conduct these trainings. And there was 6 of us all together that went through that training. So
And then next, what happened is that there's a time where there's a lot of surveys being taken place. And so a survey was taken by all of the board members and members of leadership and management team, to just see where we were. And then that same survey was also then presented to the entire staff to take. And that was a challenging survey because how many questions is it?
148.
148, and you can get it done in like 10, 15 minutes. No big deal, right? Yeah. Great question. Our organization right now is about 58 employees. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay. So then what we did is that we surveyed the rest of our staff, and then they wanted to just see how far off staff were from management. And, that's always a scary moment because you're like, oh God, what's going to happen here? And surprisingly, we were not that far off overall. And so therefore, we really were in alignment more so, but we were also very intentional in what areas we were going to pick first because we wanted the low hanging fruit and to be able to meet with success. And so that part was really nice. I think the challenge for us when we were taking the surveys is that little direction was given, but that was also done intentionally. But when you talk about people who were in the helping field, to just say, here, take a test, like that was a challenge. But again, communication is key to all this. Talked to Dr. Roden, and he came out and explained it to the staff, and that was really helpful. So we did that, and then we also did client surveys. And for being a domestic violence organization, and for a lot of organizations, obviously we have HIPAA and confidentiality and all that, but we also have a safety concern for all of our clients. And we are more than an emergency shelter. We also work with offenders. We have victim advocate program. We have therapy programs. So safety is a huge concern. And so in an ideal world, they had wanted to, like, something like 600 people ideally survey, and that did not work out for us. We got just over 200, I believe. Um, and but what it showed is that they weren't far off from our own initial survey results. So we were actually pretty good in alignment, which was nice to hear as well. And everything was confidential, by the way. We have no idea whether or not it be client, manager, board member, whatever, whatever was said on the survey. We also found that with the client surveys, because of the type of work we do, that we ended up working on a Survey Monkey tool, and that was much easier to do than to do a face-to-face, and that worked out much better to get people to respond. And then that's where we really started to determine even additional needs. So
Well, and I think once we identified those needs, that's when the Arizona Trauma Institute stepped in to provide us coaching and help the leadership team. We got the initial training up front, but then it was, okay, well, how do you help your team through this paradigm shift? How do you get them to understand what your goal is and how you're trying to move towards? And like Patricia said, they wouldn't give us the answers because they wanted us to figure that out for our organization. So to your point of the question of how large are we, every organization is different, no matter how big and how small. And so, as frustrating as it might be, because we wanted to have the information handed to us, it was more meaningful because we took the time to create it ourselves. So, and more applicable because it wasn't just a cookie cutter solution. It was what Chrysalis needed. Um, and that the availability of that coaching was crucial throughout the process. And we still have access to some of that today for support as things may arise or we might be stuck. So we focused on as a leadership team, how are we going to communicate differently with our staff? How are they going to know that we are being intentional about living these principles? And some of that was just changing structures of meetings. Some of it was trauma informed supervision is a whole beast that we're still trying to wrap our heads around, but has been fantastic. When it works well, it works amazingly. And as you're learning, it doesn't always work well. So we're trying to figure out what that looks like for us. And the staff and board and volunteers, I think one of the coolest things that we continue to hear and I've experienced in my own life is just it's not only impacting their day-to-day work with clients or their day-to-day work with each other, it's impacting people on a personal level. I had one of our teammates was with her family at Thanksgiving, and one of the granddaughters was very dysregulated because she wasn't winning a game. And she was able to just take some of the skills that she had learned and stay calm and talk quietly and turn the whole situation around to actually have an enjoyable Thanksgiving, where in the past, that incident would have dysregulated everybody involved. And so little things like that that have made an impact in people's lives, and it is just having a ripple effect, because then they're coming back and sharing that with each other and talking about, well, this is what I tried, that's what I tried, and just that learning culture of how can we improve and how can we do better has been infiltrated throughout.
well, and I would also just say that we've kind of learned a new language, and it really did start with the leadership team first in talking about integration and all those different buzzwords, but instead we started, it would be one thing to say it, but we actually were able to start to identify our own shit with it, which is really important. Because again, it goes back to living these principles, and it makes sense, and we can't just turn it off. And I think that one of the things that we also, and we were told this, is that for some staff, some staff may not be able to move along in this process because it is such a shift. And so, but we also, as an organization, knew that this was something that we wanted to do, especially with the kind of work that we do. Again, that was also being intentional. So,
And I think too, the one of the things that was a challenge when we first rolled this out, is a lot of people perceive this as a clinical type training, that it's applicable to clients. So how did we, trying to figure out ways to help our people in finance understand that it's about how they interact with each other. It's not just about client interaction. So having that training that was specific to non-clinical staff and making sure that everybody had lots of examples of how they could use it in their day-to-day lives was important for us to have. And then another key piece that we implemented up front was an implementation team. And that was suggested by the Trauma Institute as well, to have a group of people together within the organization that wasn't just the leadership team, but it might have other diverse things to add. So we did have a board member on. We do still. I shouldn't say we did. We will probably always have an implementation team we're figuring out, because as we try and live into these principles. But we have board representation, we have leadership representation, and we make sure our programs are represented. Because one of the other challenges that we also faced, Patricia mentioned that we do offender treatment as well. And I think people, when they hear trauma-informed care, can more easily understand how that is applicable to our victim clients that we serve. Um, but but the offender treatment folks and working with probation and the different expectations of all the different providers that are involved with that is just a different challenge for people to fully understand how trauma has impacted those people who end up in treatment for offending. Can you see?
yes, I can. Can you see?
I can.
You want my glasses?
No, I can still see. So the other thing that we did is and are still doing is just evaluating everything through that trauma-informed care lens. So Robin came to try and meet with me months ago to try and help us look at our HR job descriptions, and she could tell that I was dysregulated because of how the morning had started, and Patricia came in and was also dysregulated
Because
And
we had
so-
had a flood or something
yeah,
like
yeah, we
that.
did have a flood in one
Yeah.
of our buildings. So, I know this is a very interesting environment.
And so it
And
goes.
it's still regulated. Anyway, we still have tasks to do with that, but one of the things Robin said to us that day when we were trying to process, how do you get through reviewing all the job descriptions and all the policies and all the changes? And she said, just take little bites, just do a little bit each time. And that was powerful. And we've taken very little bites, but that's been okay. And as we've needed to post a new job, we've tried to make some changes. We tried to get some sort of a flow so that it became a little easier as we go. But we still need to go through our policies and procedures and make sure that they're in line and not creating any barriers that aren't not in line with our principles. So,
And that also goes with job descriptions. I mean, we are having to take a look at all the different documents and everything that goes to a client or goes to a board member. I mean, we're practicing this in our board meetings with our volunteers. I mean, and then amongst ourselves. And so that's where the process is going to continue to take place. But it is working. And so to that point, it's baby steps. but we're getting there. Those are some of like those aha moments, and you're thinking that, oh, we can just like go through this, and no, we are really kind of dissecting everything, but it's a really good organizational move for us to be able to have that opportunity. Um, so I guess one of the other things that in becoming trauma informed, we had to look at also big picture. So big picture is that we needed to update our website to become a trauma informed website. And we actually did do that as well. And ironically, that was also through Piper, through my organizational award. Sorry, I have to just call out Piper where I can. And so we also worked with an ad agency, and our website is amazing. If anybody wants to go to it, it's at noabuse.org. There's my shameless hustle. And the reason why I say that is that our last website really, I mean, besides it not being trauma informed, it needed to be updated. It needed a lot of help. But that's about us living the principles that you have to move through things. And so having that has really helped. And then the other piece of it is that we have updated marketing materials that are now trauma informed. And again, this is going to be a process. But the marketing materials, and then along with that, which may sound crazy, but we also, this part may sound crazy, but it makes sense when you think about it, is that our furniture, our colors on the wall, all that has to be part of the trauma-informed environment. And so that is a gradual process. We have been lucky because we also had received funding from Victims of Crime Act. And so for areas that were, for areas of funding that were for VOCA, that was something that we were allowed to do. And so we are gradually turning over more and more appropriate trauma-informed furniture and paintings on the wall. And you don't think that that's, you don't think about those things until you have to think about those things. And then it's also identifying, well, and I guess I'll just say this, that one of the other things is that like the white noise machines. And I remember them saying this, who has white noise machines in any of their offices or rooms? Well, those are not trauma informed, I might add, because of the decibel. And I still have one of my white noise machines out in my room, and I do understand now what they're talking about, because if you really think about it, it's like that constant. So we now have, instead of white noise machines at the emergency shelter, we have fountains. And it's really cool, and it looks really nice, and it's trauma informed. And it also just, again, it just goes with the flow of the process in the building. So I just lost my train of thought. Hold on one sec. I think also one of the things that for me, I go out, you know, I mean, we all go out to different meetings, and I've been talking about trauma-informed care for quite a while when people are asking about what our agency is doing and any updates. And I know within the domestic abuse organizations, they have been really responsive to that. And I think that that's also helped elevate Chrysalis. I didn't really see it as that was necessarily going to be a not I didn't see it as necessarily a pro, but I've just seen that that really has helped us to the point that now people want us to go and talk to their other organizations about what the process was like, or how we could best give them pearls of advice. I think that one of the other things that's really important is that, and it's, we talked about it briefly, is how we communicate with clients. And we communicate with clients, and we want to go back to the old ways, because I'm an old dog in this field. So you want to go back to the old way of communicating, and that doesn't work. And if you can understand where a client is coming from, and when you also factor in ACEs and you do all that, then it helps you to just kind of take a step back and be more empathetic and understanding, as opposed to, you must do this, you have to do this, what about that? In understanding where that dialogue can go. And again, it works in our own personal lives, and it works with our vendors, and it works with a variety of people that way. And And so it's important to treat also the employees like you want them to treat the clients, if that makes sense. So you want to be able to pay it forward so that again, that's coming from the leadership and the board all the way down. And I think one of the things that we have also learned is that as this process happened for all of us, we still had to laugh. We still had to have fun. We have to own that, you know what, we didn't do this right, or we didn't do that right, or somebody is not gonna, and that's okay. It's all about a learning opportunity for that person or for myself. But we can't be too serious. We have to just realize that again, this is going to be a long-term process for us. So, okay.
Well, and anytime you're going through a process of change, I think we all can recognize that that takes some time to go through and that there's going to be some people that are resistant to that change. And we have faced that, and the coaching helps with that. You know, we talk about the amount of time spent in training, but it's also the time, doing some individual training and some coaching that it's we have to look at it as an investment in our employees because it is very time intensive, but the payoff for the individual employee, the payoff for the clients that that person and the coworkers that they interact with is just amazing. So we need to, if you're going to take this journey, we're just recognize the time and effort and commitment that it makes is worth it in the end. I and having trauma informed supervision, like I said, we're working on trying to figure out exactly what that looks like, and we have training wheels on a little bit right now to try and figure that out. But the payoff and reward you get when you can help somebody else discover how their own strengths and their resilience and their ability to identify their own growth opportunities rather than you having to sit across from them and tell them these are the issues, please fix them. It's just a much more rewarding what opportunity for employees. Um, the Arizona Trauma Institute offers webinars, lunch and learns, all kinds of different ways for employees to get the information. Like I said, we have the videos. We're still working to go get those put up on our server so that you only take away so much in a training when you're going for 12 hours. So it will be great for people to go back and rewatch a portion, or now that I just dealt with this situation, how can I, you know, how would I apply this to that situation? So there's just constant learning and growth happening. And I know I've said that, but it's also you're just so prevalent throughout this process in order to be successful. Um,
And I think that overall, we're trying to be more consistent in our messaging, even amongst our programs, which again can be very different. So, for instance, all of our staff meetings, we now start off with, regardless of the program, we start off with, can anybody tell us a success for the week? At whether or not it's a program meeting or an all staff meeting, so that we also just try to really celebrate all the good stuff that's going on. Um, because again, that's about paying it forward and reminding people what we're here for and why we're doing that. Um, and so the process overall, and I say that overall, was really a great process, even though we stumbled a little bit or a lot of it, depending. And I would try to negotiate, and that didn't exactly work either, or maybe sometimes. Oh, here we go.
So I got to enjoy Patricia a lot because she was always trying to get an angle on how to make this a little quicker and a little bit less work and a little bit more,
Streamline.
streamlined so that, you know, isn't there a way to do this without people actually having to practice it? And the answer is no. And we're pretty good about boundaries, and no is kind of no. Um, Not maybe, it's no. So, but we had a lot of fun with them. I wanna just I'm gonna throw something in. I don't know if they were planning on talking about it, but I wanna give you an example of how they worked on something. One of the things we look at is how do you make decisions as a group? per program, for the entire organization. How do you make these decisions? Are you using your set of values and principles and the trauma informed principles to make these decisions? And are you making decisions that are outside your own organizational integrity? And so we spent quite a bit of time kind of talking about what that process looked like. And they came up with drafts of sequences of how to make decisions and eventually worked through that. But what was interesting is watching them kind of grapple with, well, because what had been kind of the standard before was making decisions that were efficient, that weren't always based on the values of the organization. But when you stopped and actually said, okay, we're going to make sure we look at all of these values that we believe and we think are important, and we're going to look at these trauma informed principles and make sure that we're also in line with those, it slowed the process down a little bit, but the decision making was so much more rich and productive. And so those, I watched them do that, and it was fun to watch. And I to be honest, I'm sitting there watching them kind of, because there's pain involved in trying to stretch and learn and grow and kind of grapple with it and kind of, have some disagreement on how it should look. And they did marvelously. They kept at it. And what emerged was a really nice process for them. So, but it was a challenge. And when we first started talking about it, it's a lot of work. It was like, oh yeah, I know. But it really is a lot of work.
Well stated. Um, so one of the things that our next step is that we have to have to them by the end of this week tw- our 24-month plan for the next 2 years of what areas we're going to work on. Which again, being certified, that makes sense that we have to do that. Um, that said, our implementation team met last week, and we first had to take a look, see at what everything we had accomplished, and having it in writing and seeing it on a board was absolutely amazing. That, like, because we took things in just little pieces as opposed to looking at the wholeness, and we have just kick butt as an organization. I really do think so. Um, and that made me so full of joy that with all the other stuff that may not have gone that way, that I would have wanted it the easier way. Um, it made us a better organization and a stronger organization, because that part is just really important. Um, and I think that some of the takeaways for us as far as what are we going to be doing in the next 24 months is that we're going to continue to train and onboard all new volunteers and staff. Um, and we know that there's going to be lots of moving pieces and there's going to again be hiccups, but that's also okay. Um, and then we also have decided that because the feedback has been so good from all the people that have um, done the training, is that we're going to open it up to their families, that they can come to the training as well. And again, we will have it available for people, for our staff and board members. So that way it just really helps them in their own family growth. That was just a really key takeaway for us. And we actually did have a few family members participate in the first round. And so if they can continue to live it on, then that even makes it better. Again, that's about paying it forward. And so even though there was strain and drain on the staff, this has been the most amazing opportunity for us to provide really true quality services. And the benefits that we see that we have really moved into is, and will be, is reducing the onboarding costs. We want that to happen. Greater retention, reduced training costs, less HR problems. I don't know, does anybody ever have any HR issues? Anybody? And improved wellness for us as an organization and increase our productivity. And I think that I can't express enough how much overall this has made us just a really rich organization. And when Dr. Roten had first asked us, I said, "Are you sure you really want us to speak? Because we'll say the truth." And he said, yes. And I'm like, okay. And so this is us just being ourselves and being raw. But I would encourage people to look into this if this is something that feels comfortable for them, um, because it is life altering as an organization. So that's all I have.
So now that they've scared you,
Can,
um,
can
uh,
say a little bit about the coaching piece
I-
first?
sure. Like our current coaching, the executive coaching part.
Yeah, the coaching that we do.
Yeah. So, by the way, I'm Robin Massey, and I am with Arizona Trauma Institute. What we've offered is, in terms of coaching, is we offer executive coaching to leaders to help them implement and to practice the trauma informed principles so that it can become part of their leadership. Because, as we know, if leaders are not modeling what they want their employees to do, it's not going to stick. And so it's a little bit of a challenge because we're talking about ourselves. So change begins with us. And the only way to do that is to hold people accountable. So we have offered, and Roderick right here is our executive coach. We've offered a 6-week executive coaching process with about a 90-minute process for 6 weeks to help kick this off into the organizations, which helps then with the leaders speaking to it, being positive, developing and kickstarting a culture shift. And it seems to be really beneficial. Drew? Okay. Anything else, Bob?
With each training that we do, what we've done is set it up so that coaching is after. So it's not just the leadership that gets supported in this, it's also the employee. When the employee gets trained on something, a lot of times they have a really good idea or two, and but when they go to apply it, sometimes it's hard to kind of do that. We provide 6 weeks of coaching and we do it by cohorts for everybody that has been trained at any level so that they can apply it to their own lives, apply it to their work, and what that does is build a greater level of sustainability in the organization so that it really does become a culture. One of the things that we talk about when we do the initial trauma training is we talk about how quite often we're dealing with people that are in a Hulk system and we need them to be in Bruce Banner system. And we use that Hulk metaphor. And there's been a number of times when I've been on the one of the Chrysalis campuses where I'm hearing employees say, "Oh, wait a minute, I'm kind of getting into Hulk, and I need to calm down a little bit." It just became permeated throughout their culture that you can pause and relax and make a decision when you're composed. You don't have to be reactive, and that was really interesting. And that was supported by the coaching. And what we learned in the process of doing the coaching for them is we've actually upped it, and we make instead of having it be kind of voluntary, which is what it was for them, we now make it mandatory for everybody that's trained to go through the coaching. And we're finding in organizations now is that speeds up the process. It creates a quicker change in those organizations to do that. So, and again, Roderick is doing a lot of that, and we have other coaches as well. So um, that's really
Um, I think one of the things that's really important is relationships over efficiencies, and I think that especially for the most of us in this room, efficiency is typically how we tend to operate, and we have been so mindful and intentional about having it be relational, and it's working. It's working really amazingly well. Is that the relationship? If you focus on the relationship, then the efficiency will come, but it's not being driven so obvious. And really, everybody, the relationship piece is just so rich, and that's been a true culture shift for us, but wonderful. So.
Okay. All right. So do you want to know how this really works? I'm just going to kind of back up a little bit. When Bob first started talking about this whole process of certification and kind of sharing that he needed a little bit of different approach in this organizational piece, he didn't quite get it. I went and I sat very quietly observing this whole process with Chrysalis, with Bob and Patricia and Angie, and a whole table full of implementers, and just watching them stress out. And I said, Bob, you are frustrating these people. And I can tell you, if I was sitting at this table, I would never be able to do this process. There's got to be a better way. So my brain just started clicking. It's okay. How can we kind of gently expedite this process and create something that's still very relational? So my role has been, how do we create a level of efficiency along with maintaining relationship? I am very driven for efficiency, but relationship will always lead. It always wins. And that is how I am wired. So the blessing for me is to get to watch an organization like this take something and run with it. And I'm going to try to touch on a lot of things you said because I'm going to look at notes here too. But really, the goal is to get these trauma informed principles through the DNA of the entire organization and its people. And how do we do that? We start with a self-assessment, which is something we learned through Chrysalis, is that we want them to own the process. Every organization is different. We need to hear what it is that your challenges are and how can we then work within those challenges. So that is where we will begin with any organization. We now do a very clean, quick survey monkey benchmark assessment of attitudes throughout the entire organization. This helps us then to know where are we beginning, then we implement for a period of time, and then we'll reassess at the end to see what has really improved. This is data driven change, and that is what we love to see. So we are all about analytics data and measuring what are we doing throughout this process. And with that, there comes a level of ownership and discovery. So Bob is very self-discovery oriented. I'm like, I need to give a little information here to kind of push it forward a little faster, which I think Patricia was very pleased with. So that's kind of where I came into this process. And for me, it's a knowledge transfer. So what we do now through all of the coaching and the cohorts is we are giving knowledge. We want the organization to become self-sufficient and to sustain this over a long period of time. I'm just going to kind of look through some of the packet that's in front of you, just so I will touch on some of the points that you're mentioning. But the self study was is really critical because it helps us to then hold you accountable and show where we want to be able to work on some things. As we know, this is a really expensive loss for organizations. When we are working with people who are experiencing toxic stress or histories of adversity, there's a large amount of absenteeism. And what we find is that when we actually are implementing this process, people like to come to work. They love to feel a part of something really big. There is a sense of ownership, a sense of belonging, and with that, there's increased safety in the organization. So, how do we make that happen? We work with this implementation team, figuring out how do we communicate. And communication is as simple as having a smile when you walk down the hall, taking a moment to ask how someone is, starting an email with a warm greeting, couple of bite sizes of content, and then ending with a warm close. How simple is that, and how quickly we do not do it when we're in a hurry. So, those are some of the little things that make the biggest difference. And I think they're speaking to that. It's the relationship piece that doesn't take a whole lot, but how do we then make that change throughout the organization? That's part of what we come up with, and they own it and create the processes. And then it works through the policies, procedures, and practices from the top down. And the reason it takes time is because real change takes time. And that's where everybody needs to then practice it. Some of the elements that we use for our training and we touch on is the idea of competence and listening and communication skills. Those are critical. And to me, that's the foundation. And then we move forward from there. We also help with some strategies and interventions to reduce distress. And that's part of what the trainings are about. And then to practice them to stay regulated. I know that I love that Dr. Perry was talking about stress is good. If we don't experience stress, we're not really growing. So, this type of stress we're talking about when we're practicing is part of the good stress that helps us own our process. We continue on to then just building other skills and building on to what skills are already in the organization. Hence why the self-study is so important, because every organization might have a higher level of trauma-informed processes maybe already happening, and we want to work with that organization rather than saying this is how it's going to be. It doesn't work that way. It's not turnkey, but we certainly can adapt really well. So I'm just kind of moving through our little process here so that I don't forget anything. But one of the other the areas that we really like to focus on is there's a couple of areas personally that are really important. This is the best gift that we give people and humans, period, because it is professional development for our people, but it's also personal development that we then take home to our families. It ripples into the community. Everything is just better. To me, it goes bigger than just inside an organization. But what it does is it transforms the culture of the organization, of course, but people want to come to work. Absenteeism is reduced, retention is increased, sense of belonging is increased, and people actually like to work in these places where they feel like they are contributing. And so I just recently read an article. It was a Gallup study talking about what is one of the number one things that keeps people in organizations, and it's professional development. This is professional development that we are gifting to our people, not us, Arizona Trauma Institute, but you are gifting to your people. And that's what you were saying is really, really valuable.
Okay, I'm
So
gonna interrupt you just a second.
sure.
It's easy to say professional development. I wanna make it a little bit more real to you, if that's okay.
Mhm.
So we did a training of all the non-clinical folks, and one of the people that came up and talked to me afterwards and said, "Okay, so I am a cook. How do I use this?" And it was interesting because he was fully okay with and wanted to be able to use it. And one of the things that I've seen happen as I've worked with not only Chrysalis, but other organizations is when the staff have a sense of mission around this, it is amazing. They support each other, they lift each other up. And even people that often aren't thought about being able to contribute much, they have a lot to contribute. I don't know how many people the cook would come in contact with, but we've had some of the physical facilities folks too that had questions about, well, how do I do this, and how would it look if I was doing it. So I want you to understand, it isn't just we're not just talking in terms of this kind of pie in the sky kind of idea. We're talking about real people in real jobs changing fundamentally how they interact with each other. And when you watch that process and you watch it over and over and over again, it changes how you understand how an organization can work.
Well, and it's funny because when you talk about the cook, he has now been promoted to a different position and is not in the cooking field at all because of all of his relationships and connections to staff and to clients. He now is in a fabulous position that he loves, and it really does. I just like when you just said that, I'm like, that's where he really got that confidence to just take that risk. So,
As we say, from boardroom to copy room and everybody in between, including drivers and otherwise, and cafeteria workers. So everyone gets the opportunity to learn the trauma-informed principles and encouraged to implement them, and it's necessary in order to create the change that you really do want to see. So uh, you were talking about supervision and changing how you supervise. That is one of our critical focuses, is how as managers do we then give evaluations, and to be able to do them with using trauma informed principles so that we know that someone's not immediately jacked up when they're coming into this evaluation. We want to create safe environments where we can get our people to want to come in and actually talk with management and not always feel like they're under scrutiny. There's nothing punitive about a healthy evaluation. And that's part of what the trauma informed principles help do. So that we help with all of these pieces, all of the steps, all of the DNA, all of it is takes some time. But as Patricia was saying, pretty much every piece of paper, you reread it and look, are the trauma informed principles woven in? So it's like a new fabric, if you will. And so it just takes a little bit of time. So some of the trauma informed values and principles that we're talking about, or the idea of creating safety, that everything that we do in the organization is designed to then engender a balance on our central nervous system, so we can keep everyone regulated in a mindful, common cultural language really helps as well. We also talk about transparency, and the importance of being transparent creates trust, and with trust we have emotional, psychological safety as well as physical safety. We also interact on relational relationships, but that also empowers others. We want to always empower others. So these are some of the values that the trauma informed principles are based on, but then we integrate them into the organizational values as well. So is everything then integrated and aligned to then live out your mission, as you say? And it starts with leadership, but also from the very first time someone explores the website, does it look like a trauma informed website? From the very first phone call, does it sound like a kind, trauma informed, inviting phone call? From the time that they are walked out the door, is every single touch in alignment with your values that are trauma informed? So we take every single touch and walk through that with the organization. Um, was there anything else? I'm trying to think. You guys had so much. I wish I could have been writing notes, but this helps me a little bit. So I'm following along in the packet on your table, by the way, just making sure that I don't miss anything. So this was part of how it helped me organize my mind, because the process is never linear. It is an absolute flow of where do we need to be at this time in space, and it's a relationship that we develop with you to decide, okay, what's next, and we kind of let you drive that. Where is the highest need? What else? Let's see. So we also want to make sure that we develop, that culture of respect. And I said, I don't know about you, but sometimes when you've had the crappiest day, if somebody just smiles at you and says, "How you doing today?" and genuinely means it, how rare is that? And in this world, this is what we aspire to, is to create that kind of true caring change. And it doesn't take that much. It just takes time. It is not a hard process. It can be a little self-discovery frustrating process, but it is not hard. It is just ownership driven, and that's what we help you do. Is there anything else that you're thinking of? It was on, I think.
I think we all try to practice mindfulness to begin with, but I will say that going through this program, we practice it so much more. And
Mhm.
you see the relationships of staff just improve over and over again. And that again, that goes back to intentional, but it also then helps with the retention of staff as well. And you can just see that staff can really grow with that.
And we know that when that people feel wanted and in relationship, everything improves. Productivity increases. It's everything is more efficient. We want to work together. So to me, although we're taking a few extra seconds to be in relationship, everything else goes faster. So
And I think employees too, for us, are recognizing when that's happening for themselves. So we had our annual fundraising event in November, and that tends to be a time that many of our staff become pretty dysregulated because there's a lot of extra demands on them in addition to getting needing to get their regular job duties done. And then just like planning a wedding, planning an event always brings out interesting feelings in people and personalities. Yes. So it was really cool at our event. One of our employees pulled me aside and she said, "You know what? We had the tools this year. The team had the tools this year to actually enjoy this event. We were able to stay regulated, and when we weren't quite there, so we could talk about it and had the language to use and knew what to do to get ourselves back at a better place." So, I mean, it's just amazing.
is it called grace?
Mhm.
Yeah,
Exactly.
language to extend grace, to understand each other. So, what kinds of questions do you have that might help us be able to address and just say, where did we leave something out? What's going on in your heads? What didn't we touch? Yes. I believe it was October a year ago.
October a year ago is when Dr. Roten came and talked to our board, and then the self surveys took place thereafter. But then we just started having more and more meetings. Yeah.
You know, one of the things that Patricia mentioned is the idea of rewriting the job descriptions to align with trauma-informed principles. It's also really important that that kind of information, when you're hiring, that you now have new questions to ask, so that you know that you're attracting the same talent that has similar um, values, and that that will also help sustain the change. And then looking deeper in the organization for succession planning. These are all pieces that we bring to this process so that you're thinking deeper and not just surface. There's nothing surface here. This is why it works and it lasts and it changes, and it's a systemic change. And it's really great to hear you touch on all the things that you touched on. Other questions? Thank you, Lori. Yes, ma'am. Oh, what, red back there, then purple. Ooh.
Um,
You're on.
okay. Trauma informed furniture, it can be about the color. And actually, when we were having to order it, I was Googling it to see what are trauma informed colors. And there's different palettes. But it's more of like the sea tones, or it could be a lighter color. It could be a turquoise. It could be a soft green or a darker green, some blues. But yeah, even like for our pictures for the website, we had to, pretty much try to focus in on trauma informed colors to wear.
Does lighting matter?
Yes, lighting does matter. We have not exactly gotten there yet, but yes, overhead lighting is not a good thing. And I mean, I think a lot of people would probably really know that, but um, we also know that those are the things that we have to look at from an ongoing funding perspective, is what can we do to improve those areas, and lighting definitely is one of them.
Right. And
Yeah.
as you mentioned, it's simple shifts over a period of
Yeah,
time.
it's not going to happen overnight
Yeah.
at all.
Compound effect. Great. I had- Yes. Purple. Yes.
So Robin's,
You're good.
I can probably talk loud enough that I don't need this. Robin came on this last year because when we decided to offer. Okay, we wanted to offer a formal certification, but I've worked with organizations as large as 200 employees, helping them do this before, but we didn't offer a certification in it before. So Chrysalis is the first one we've done the certification for. We're working with some other companies right now, and I think the average, I think is about 75, 80 employees so far. But we also have um, been talking to organizations. Um, I'll give you an example. The Washington State's Veteran Services, which is a fairly large and involved organization. Um, so we're talking to larger organizations, but for the for the certification piece, um, Chrysalis was the first one we actually certified. Uh, it's the same basic process I followed when we did other organizations. But having Robin come on um, and be able to kind of create additional structure to make it more efficient to help people do this will allow us to even take larger organizations and manage it. So that's uh, if you had 500 or 600 employees, we probably are going to take a deep gasping breath before we really want to talk about that. But
Not
uh,
me. I'm like, yes, bring it on. 1,000 people. Yes, we can do that because we can. It's the same process. It just takes longer to train trainers within the
yeah.
organization to help just go deeper.
Again,
Pieces, yes, absolutely, because it is the same thing. It's just we begin at the with the leadership, and then the rest is kind of within your organization. You know your organization and how you would want to roll this out. So that's how it would work, and we then help with that process. And as you want, I want to go back to the videos. The video platform, and Zach is our videographer. He is our mastermind behind all of our videos and trainings, and those are critical because we have DVDs. We're like, here, this is how you can then roll this out to your department, your wherever it is. If someone cannot make it to a physical training, we have webinar training. So there is this rippling effect of touch reach with technology. It's a beautiful thing. So yes, 7,000, absolutely. It just takes time. It's just more time. See, this is why I'm here, because I'm like, yes, we can systematize this. Yes, yes. So great, thank you for asking that. Yes, Lori.
Beginning and end.
Yeah, no, there is an end. Yeah, what we want to see is benchmarks of how well is the organization implementing and making some progress. So we will do measures throughout. We actually use two different assessments in the beginning as our benchmarks. And then part of what they're talking about too is the self assessment towards what we call the end of the certification process, is to talk about what deliverables will you show as examples of how you've created some change. And one of the, I love, there's two pieces that Chrysalis did that to me is brilliant. As Bob was talking about the decision tree, it was fabulous because it put in process for everyone to go through all of these steps before they make a final decision. And it was very it took time, and it was so fun because I'm an educator by training in the background, watching them think this through, and boy did they own it. And the tree is something I will now use to as a recommendation for other organizations. Hope you don't mind. And also then communication, a process for communication as well. So creating these pieces was magic to know that this is long term, and it helps us too, helps me in my mind to figure out how to offer other suggestions for an organization. I don't even know what question that was, but I kind of went off the deep end. Sorry. Yeah. So other questions? Yes, ma'am. Great question. And you know what? It is absolutely different for every organization, and it really depends on what what the organization is, who you serve, and how many trainings, and because there's just so many layers to it. So we sit down and we talk with leadership. We hear what the needs are, and then we customize whatever this would be for that particular organization. Great question.
There really isn't a one size fits all because every organization has its own personality and it has its own kind of life. And you have to tailor it to help them move that in the direction they want. And so you really do need to have opportunities. We sit down. We usually spend at least a couple of hours with with leadership, just kind of getting a feel for what they want and how they would want to go about it. And from there, then we can kind of lay out. Well, this is in line with what you want. Is this what you want? We usually create it. We create it in tiers so that sometimes they don't have the resources to do the whole thing right now, but they can do this part. And so we also break it up that way.
Hmm. Great questions. What other questions do you have? Sounds like it. Okay. See, that's what happens, the 10-second rule, right? Hmm. Oh, so glad you asked. Very glad you asked. In fact, we've done work with Albuquerque schools. We've done work with, what's the name of Rebecca's school?
Holiday Park.
Holiday Park. Holiday Park, the principal at that school has an incredible success story about from the top. She transformed her entire organization, and all of her teachers, who used to pretty much leave every single year, all have stayed for a couple of years in a row since she has implemented this training. What she has taught is her teachers have changed the environment and how they deal with the student. And so that in itself has increased performance. She went from a C school to a B school. I can't remember what the data is, but she was very proudly sitting at our table saying, "This is everything that Dr. Perry is talking about. Her numbers are up." And so this is definitely going into school systems. And again, it's a funding issue, but we're there doing trainings, but training itself is not enough. It has to be applied. So this is where we're hoping that schools will see the value and that we can then implement it in it deeper with the teachers. But again, it's the teachers who need to make the change in the classrooms, and the administration needs to support that and push that down to then the students. So I love that you asked that question. So yes, schools definitely need to make those changes. Bob, did you care to add to that?
Well, we've worked with the East St. Louis schools. We've worked with Albuquerque schools. We've done some things here locally. The challenge always with schools is that you'll have the odd maverick principal that wants to do this, and the difficulty is always getting kind of any buy-in from the district. And so, but if you can get that, uh, the change process is pretty straightforward. And there's lots, not we can help people do this, but there's lots of really good models out there already that are piloted. There's good statistics and data on them, and that have been used in schools across the country since what 2004.
Mhm.
So so we know that it works and it works well. The commitment is always the leadership, because what they want, what in their thought process is, they're thinking about what do we want these students to do, and the students, and I'll be really honest, no child can outregulate the adult in their environment.
Mhm.
And what you have is a lot of staff that are good-hearted, but they're not regulated well enough to help regulate a child. And they don't think in terms of what I'm seeing is a result of arousal. They see it as volitional bad behavior. And so it really does take some intentionality and some support from whoever the leader is to do that process. But it is very doable, and the results, doesn't really. I mean, we put in some effort and we provided coaches for teachers when we first worked with Holiday Park, and we provide coaches for the folks in Albuquerque. But the reality is that you have teachers that really want to do a good job. They just don't. They lack this basic information. Most of them were trained in classroom management skills that were developed in the 50s during the Eisenhower era,
Mhm.
and you don't have that kid in your classroom anymore. So, and they haven't. So we need to help them. Need to help all systems move away from the sustaining the status quo. Did I
Yeah,
Can I stay off that?
you did good. We had one more question right back there in the sweater. No? Yes? Red shirt, red dress. Go ahead.
You want me to answer that one? So one of the things I mentioned to Chrysalis early on is that we're going to train people. They will become fully immersed in this. They will love this process. But as the nature of the business is, they will move on to other organizations. So what we are actually looking at is we focus on the organizations we focus on. because we know that the mobility, at least in the mental health field, is that in 5, 6, 10 years, this will be permeated into almost all organizations to some extent, because the people that love it and are enjoying it, when they get an opportunity to get a promotion or move to a different company or get on different responsibility, they're going to want to recreate that in the environments that they're in. So we look at it, we're trying to take a long view. Maybe that's not a patience that most people want to do. But when I first started talking about this stuff, in like 2000, I used to have judges occasionally threaten me with contempt for questioning them. And now we have trained all the Superior Court judges. We have worked with the Arizona Supreme Court. We have served as a consultant for some of those different courts in our state. And they listen, it only took, 17, 18 years to get there. So a lot of this is not going to happen quickly. It's got to build a momentum in a community, and then as it builds that influence in a community, it'll hit a certain point where it just will catch fire.
Mhm.
We've been
Yeah.
doing we've been working on getting recognition of ACEs, for over a decade. And we're finally at the place where it's beginning to, everybody's kind of acknowledging it now. So I think this will be the same. I think, you know, there's clearly a need for it there, because it's how to help a corporate culture create a better environment for their employee, and a better environment for the services that they provide. It isn't about just, running on the functionary of business. It is really about how we establish a human to human connection, which is desperately needed. The American Psychological Association last September released a whole special journal article on relationships, saying that one of the primary public health concerns in the entire world is a lack of significant attached relationships. That is a public health issue. And so we're addressing it, but we're addressing it in a way that it can be absorbed and lived in a community.
One starfish at a time. Actually, I believe that the exponential compound effect is coming way quicker than we realize now. How wonderful that we had this event here today. I think this is part of that process.
I think we're out
So,
of time.
yes. So, thank you so much. If you have any questions, we are on the back of this right here.